The morning the frontier, changed forever, began with a scream swallowed by the roar of the river, a sound so sharp it sliced through the cottonwoods along the San Miguel crossing, where 10-year-old Clara Whitfield had been gathering driftwood after the storm. She was small for her age, slender as a fence rail, with sun-bronzed skin and wheat-colored hair braided loosely down her back. And though she had grown up between bucking winds and rifle shots, she had never heard anything like that cry. It wasn't the scream of a grown woman or the bark of danger from a man. It was thin, high and trembling with life and terror, the unmistakable wail of a baby. Clara froze, the bundle of wet branches slipping from her arms as she turned toward the riverbank. The current was still swollen from the night's rain, brown and fast, snatching at roots and carrying broken limbs like arrows. And there, clinging to a half-submerged log spinning toward the rapid bend, was a tiny cradle board decorated with beadwork shining like raindrops, and inside it, wrapped in soft deerskin, was an Apache infant no bigger than a loaf of bread, its little fists punching at the air as the river threatened to swallow it whole. Clara didn't think about danger or tribal tensions or what her father, Marshall Whitfield, would say if he saw her even near an Apache child. She only felt a jolt in her heart, something fierce and bright, as if the world had shrunk to a single choice. Move or let the river take the baby away forever. And so she moved. She leapt into the water without hesitation, the cold biting her legs and stealing her breath as the current slammed against her small frame, trying to spin her around like a leaf. Her boots filled instantly, dragging her down, but she kicked and fought, eyes locked on the cradle board as it bobbed dangerously toward the jagged rocks ahead. The river growled, rising to her waist, then her chest, pushing her sideways, pulling her feet out from under her. But she clung to a jutting branch and lunged forward with everything she had, fingers brushing the slick wooden frame, then missing. She gasped, her heartbeat thundering as panic surged through her. The baby's cry grew weaker, water splashing into its cradle, its little face scrunched with fear. Clara swallowed hard, dug her toes into the mud, and pushed off again, stretching so far her shoulder felt like it might rip free, and this time her hand caught the corner of the cradle board. The impact nearly tore her arm from its socket, but she held tight, screaming as the force of the current yanked her downstream. The log on which the cradle board was snagged dipped suddenly, threatening to flip, and Clara swung her other arm around it, hugging it with all her might. Kicking hard until, inch by inch, she pulled the precious bundle against her chest. The moment she secured the cradle board in both arms, the log snapped free and shot past her, and Clara lost her footing entirely, pulled into the deepest part of the crossing. She went under, cold water filling her ears, her clothes heavy as stone. But even as fear clawed at her lungs, she kept her grip on the child, curling her body around it. She burst to the surface coughing, blinking river water from her eyes just in time to see her salvation. A low branch stretching out like a hand from the old cottonwood her family, called the sentinel. Clara kicked toward it, every muscle screaming, and thrust one arm out, fingertips slipped, caught, slipped again, then finally hooked around the branch with desperate strength. She held on, gasping, the baby wailing softly against her chest, as she dragged both of them out of the main current and into the shallower edge of the river, collapsing to her knees in the mud, trembling from the cold and the terror and the fast realization of what she had done. She looked down at the infant, whose dark eyes blinked up at her, confused and shivering. Its tiny hand curled around her thumb with surprising strength, and she felt her breath catch in her throat. "You're safe now," Clara whispered, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. But the moment the words left her mouth, something else filled the air. Hoofbeats, heavy, fast, angry. She stiffened and lifted her head as two Apache riders burst from the trees on the far bank, their horses splashing into the shallows, their faces carved with panic and fury. One held a bow, the other a spear, both shouting in a language Clara didn't understand but whose meaning pulsed with unmistakable intensity. The child was theirs. Clara's heart jolted. If they thought she had taken the infant on purpose, she hugged the baby closer, trying to stand despite her trembling legs, raising her free hand in a gesture of peace like she'd seen her father do in tense moments. "I saved him," she cried, voice shaking. "He was in the river. I just wanted to help." The riders slowed, exchanging a quick look before dismounting, their expressions shifting from suspicion to stunned relief as they saw the cradle board soaked and the child shivering. The older warrior stepped forward, his eyes hard but wet with emotion, and placed his hand over his heart in a gesture Clara recognized as gratitude. Before anyone could speak, a rifle cracked from the ridge above, then a single explosive shot that echoed across the canyon. The older Apache jerked, stumbling, clutching his arm as blood began to seep between his fingers. Clara screamed as men on horseback, white settlers from the nearby outpost, charged into view, rifles raised, dust rising behind them like smoke. "Get away from the girl," one of them shouted. "They're attacking!" Clara spun, panicked, shaking her head. "No, they weren't. They just wanted—" But her voice was drowned out by the thunder of hooves, the roar of the river, and the terrifying realization that the 1 minute she spent saving the Apache baby had ignited something far larger than she could have imagined, something that would change the entire frontier before the sunset. Chaos exploded across the riverbank as settlers thundered down the ridge, dust clouding behind them like a storm, their rifles pointed at the Apache riders who stood helplessly between panic and fury, and Clara felt the terror in the air crack like lightning. The wounded Apache warrior raised his uninjured arm toward the settlers in a plea for calm, his voice rising in words she could not understand. But the settlers only saw fear, and fear had a way of twisting truth into violence. Clara clutched the Apache baby tighter against her chest and stepped in front of the wounded man without thinking, her small body trembling but unmoving, as she planted herself between two worlds ready to collide. Her father, Marshal Whitfield, burst through the crowd of settlers, boots skidding in the mud as he saw his daughter standing in the line of fire. "Clara, move!" he shouted, but she shook her head, tears mixing with river water on her cheeks. "No, Papa. They weren't hurting me. They were trying to get their baby. I saved him." Marshal Whitfield saw everything, the fear, the truth, the danger, and slowly lifted both hands, commanding the settlers to stand down. Tension rippled through the air, thick and dangerous, until a new voice rose from the trees. An Apache woman, the baby's mother, running toward them with tears streaming down her face. She fell to her knees, lifting the child into her arms and crying softly in relief, her voice shaking with a mother's gratitude. Then she turned to Clara, touched her chin gently, and murmured, "Little one, you saved my son." Chief Tansa emerged behind her, his presence strong and commanding. He looked at Clara, this tiny frontier girl who had done what grown men feared, and said, "We owe you a debt beyond words." But settlers shouted from behind, fear-twisting truth again. The frontier stood on the edge of war. Then the baby cried, one small, fragile cry, and the entire valley went silent. Marshal Whitfield met Chief Tansa's gaze. Slowly, deliberately, they shook hands, the first gesture of peace in years. The Apache mother took a beaded bracelet from her wrist and tied it around Clara's. "One brave minute," she whispered. "1 minute that saved my son and may save us all." As the Apache riders disappeared into the distance, with the child safe in his mother's arms, Clara looked out over the river. It still rushed and hissed, wild and dangerous, but now somehow full of hope. Her father rested his hand on her shoulder. "You changed something today, Clara. You changed the frontier." And she believed him. If you enjoyed this powerful frontier story, a story of courage, unity, and one little girl who changed history with a single brave minute, then make sure you subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more inspiring Wild West stories, emotional journeys, and cinematic storytelling straight to you. Hit like, share this story, and subscribe for more unforgettable adventures.